It is over. The missing submarine has been found, and it is not good news. OceanGate said in a statement just moments ago that all 5 passengers have sadly been lost. And we know this because the debris they found is now being confirmed to be from the missing submarine. And they said it was consistent with a catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber. Now, as for their bodies, the US Coast Guard said that they may never be recovered due to the incredibly unforgiving environment. Also, the banging noises, turns out, was never them. But saying that, if the submarine did implode, which it now seems it did, the passengers would have died almost instantly, as opposed to slowly and painfully freezing or suffocating to death. Now, in terms of lawsuits, the waiver that these passengers would have signed was pretty damn comprehensive, and reportedly mentioned death 3 times on page 1. I guess we'll just have to wait and see from the 500 documentaries we all know are about to come out.
I raped and killed women. My name is Ted Bundy, and I was a predator lurking among the innocent. From the outside, I appeared charming and charismatic, but deep inside, a darkness consumed me. I preyed upon young women, luring them into my web of deceit. With a smile on my face, I concealed my true intentions. I roamed the streets seeking my next victim, manipulating their trust and exploiting their vulnerability. The adrenaline rush I felt as I took their lives was an intoxicating thrill, fueling my insatiable appetite for destruction. I carefully planned my heinous acts, stalking and capturing my prey with calculated precision. No one suspected the evil that lurked behind my innocent facade. My twisted desires knew no bounds. As the body count rose, the authorities closed in on me. But even when apprehended, I played the part of the innocent, manipulating the system to maintain control. The courtrooms became my stage, where I reveled in the chaos and confusion I caused. But justice eventually caught up to me, and the truth of my monstrous nature was exposed. My reign of terror came to an end, and I faced the consequences of my horrific actions.
Scariest videos on the internet, part 4. This is a famous statue that is said to be haunted. And someone caught its eyes moving on camera. What in the night of the museum is this?
This is one of the most horrific cases I've heard recently, so please be warned before watching. 29-year-old Taylor Parker has just been sentenced to death for a crime so horrendous that I can't believe a human is capable of this. Regan Simmons Hancock and Taylor had met online. Their online friendship soon blossomed into a real-life connection. It was 2022 and Regan was married with a young daughter. She was also 8 months pregnant at this time. Taylor was also pregnant, or so it would seem to the outside world. She was posting pregnancy pictures on social media and even hosted a gender reveal party. Little did her loved ones know that she was actually staging the entire thing. Regan and Taylor were really good friends around this time and they were bonding over their pregnancies. Regan even shared a Facebook status thanking Taylor for bringing her round a gift and Starbucks. This was the day before she would be murdered by Taylor. On Taylor's supposed due date, she made her way round to Regan's house in Texas. Shortly after, Regan's mum made a horrifying discovery. Her daughter was face down on the floor, deceased, with blood everywhere. Her mum rang the emergency services and they raced to the scene. It became apparent that her baby had been, and again a massive trigger warning here, ripped out of her stomach, and Regan had been stabbed over 100 times. Meanwhile, Taylor was pulled over for speeding and driving erratically. She'd actually put the baby in her lap with the umbilical cord coming out of her trousers to make it seem like she'd just given birth. When the pair were taken to hospital, the horrors of what actually happened became apparent. The newborn baby tragically passed away and Taylor was arrested. She was sentenced to death, but her defense lawyer said that her loved ones should have done more to protect her earlier on when she was pretending to be pregnant.
I had 5 skull fractures and multiple contusions in my head, and because of the skull fractures, the 8th nerve was damaged and I lost the hearing in my left ear and the equilibrium, and I had a broken jaw and my left shoulder was pulled out of joint and I was just pretty bruised.
This little girl was kidnapped in 2018 and has just been found. On the 25th of October 2018, 4-year-old Esmeralda Lopez was on a supervised visit with her biological mum. Her mum, Esmeralda, was being investigated over abuse allegations, so Esmeralda was actually in foster care at the time. It was arranged that the pair would have a supervised visit at a Washington shopping centre. However, during the visit, Esmeralda requested to take Esmeralda to the toilets and used the opportunity to snatch the little girl in a stolen vehicle. The FBI were notified and a huge search for Esmeralda and even advertised a $10,000 reward. It wasn't until a year later that Esmeralda was found and arrested, but there was still no sign of the little girl. That was until last month. She was recovered by Mexican authorities in February in western Mexico. In 2021, Esmeralda was actually extradited back to Washington state and pled guilty to second-degree kidnapping and robbery. She was sentenced to 20 months in prison.
Here are the latest updates from the missing Titanic submarine. As of this post, there are roughly 30 hours left in its oxygen supply, so it's a critical race against the clock to find the sub. And it turns out that experts in submersible vehicles wrote a letter several years ago warning the CEO of the missing sub that their approach could end in disaster. And in 2018, David Lockridge, who was the director of marine operations for the company, demanded more rigorous safety checks on the sub and was fired for it. Also, it turns out the sub was controlled with a $30 Logitech controller and has no way of navigating itself underwater. It relies on messages from the mothership, which uses Starlink to do so. Time is ticking. It's a sad story, but let's hope it ends with good news. Puberty will keep you updated.
Let's talk about this picture. It centers around Mr. and Mrs. Dubois. They were some of the town of Hackenshaw's favorite neighbors, but they had a dark side to them. But first, we're gonna enjoy some pizza. This is like my favorite pizza. It's from Marco's Pizza. Reminds me of Jersey because I'm from Jersey. You see, they were kind to everyone. Even invited people who just moved into town for dinners. They would also have the best decorations for holidays as well. Their house would always win the contest for best decorated in the town. People just loved their Christmas lights and their Halloween decorations. In the beginning of October 1876, they started throwing parties for the kids. All the kids from around the town would come, even from outside the town. It was fun. They played games, they ate candy, and everyone just had a good time. But out of the 20 kids that came over that night, about 4 went missing. And after about 3 weeks of searching, the case went slow and they gave up. Halloween finally came around, and the contest for the best decorations, of course, went to the Dubois. That night while trick-or-treating, one of the boys in town named Sam went up to one of the decorations. When he grabbed the mask off, he realized it was one of the children who went missing. The child was stuffed and put on display in front of the yard as a decoration. The Dubois, who saw this and not wanting to get caught, grabbed the little kid inside, adding him to their collection. No one suspected a thing because the Dubois were so kind and nice to everyone. It wasn't until years later on their deathbed that they admitted at throwing parties every year to steal a child or 3 and told police that they could find all the missing children in their basement. The reason they did it was because they needed decorations realistic enough so they could always win those contests.
A group of friends took a photo before a big night out, but later when they looked back at the photo, they were stunned with what they saw. A young girl is shown crying and in distress in the bottom right of the photo. She said she didn't want to be in the photo because the little boy was scaring her. Her mother and the other girls present thought she was just being silly. It was only later on when they looked back at the photos of the night, they suddenly realised that she wasn't. Crouching between the legs of the girls is shown a little boy, but there wasn't a little boy there that night.
So we know that people do fall into hot springs in Yellowstone, like the guy that completely dissolved in one in 2016. Most of these are completely accidental, but have you heard the story of Don Cressy? In 1975, a bunch of young employees at Yellowstone decided they were going to sneak out one night and go into a hot spring. And they invited Don Cressy, who was a 21-year-old chef who had worked in the park for 3 summers. But that night, Don never shows up to the party. 2 days later, a small child stumbles upon his body floating in one of the hottest hot springs in the area. So the theory at the time was that Don had gotten into the wrong hot spring while trying to attend the party with his coworkers, and he accidentally jumped into one that boiled him alive. Here's the twist, and I talk about it in the episode. Not only was that hot spring not anywhere near where the party was taking place, but his car was not at the party. Someone had fully driven him there. Everyone who was at the party said that they never saw him show up, but he must have gotten there with someone. It was eventually ruled accidental, but his friends just felt like that never made sense. He had worked at the park for 3 summers and he knew it better than anyone. He knew to not get into that specific hot spring. So one time someone did dive headfirst into boiling water at Yellowstone after a dog. In 1981, David Kirwan was at Yellowstone with a friend when his friend's dog got away and jumped into a 200-degree hot spring. People around were screaming at David to not go in after the dog, but he didn't even give it a second thought. He just dove straight in. Some people completely dissolve when they do this because the pools tend to be very acidic, which I talk about in this week's episode, but that didn't happen here. So David was able to swim out far enough to get the dog, but he realized it was way too hot, so he had to leave the dog and turned around to come back. His friend was able to pull him out, but at this point David was completely blind from the boiling water getting into his eyes. A stranger had also run over to help, and he tried to take David's shoe off of his foot, but David's skin had completely melted and started coming off with the shoe. And on top of all of this tragedy, Moosey, the dog, unfortunately didn't make it out of the hot spring. She was completely lost. And David also succumbed to the burns the next day. You'd assume at this point people know the dangers of the hot springs, but people go into them way more often than you'd think. If you have a dark curiosity about this kind of stuff, you might be interested in the episode I just did.
Ayo, something traumatic happened that changed my life. Check.
Oh my God. I don't even have to have a hook for this story as it left me speechless. Hi, my name is Ethan and here's everything you need to know in under 1 minute. This is 56-year-old Billie Davis. On the evening of January 11th, 2023, she was riding the Bloomington transit bus when an 18-year-old girl had got out of her seat to exit. Out of nowhere, Billie got up and then began beating and stabbing the 18-year-old girl in the head. As soon as it started, it stopped. Billie then got off the bus and walked away. Thankfully, one of the passengers on the bus did follow Billie and eventually called authorities to let them know where her location was. This is the part that really enraged me. Once in custody, she told police that she wanted to unalive the victim due to her, quote, being Chinese, as it would be one less person to blow up the country, end quote. According to reports, she is now facing up to life in prison for attempted murder.
Did you know that this movie was allegedly inspired by a disturbing true crime case? The Wu family in Kaohsiung, Taiwan believed they were possessed by religious deities. There are very few sources that are translated into English, so I'm not sure of the full details of the story. But allegedly in 2005, the family believed they were cursed and began accusing each other of being possessed by various demons. To get rid of these demons, they stopped eating, began beating each other, burned their skin with incense, and force-fed each other feces. Within a month, their 28-year-old daughter died from exhaustion and multiple organ failure. The family was convinced that it wasn't their daughter who was dying, but the demon who possessed her, so they didn't get her medical help. They were all sent for psychiatric evaluation and diagnosed with shared delusional disorder and hysteria. And the remaining 5 members of the family were indicted on reckless endangerment. If you guys saw this movie, let me know what you thought.
If you're not following this Zachariah Anderson case, but you're into true crime, do yourself a favor by first of all looking into it, and second of all listening to me, because I'm going to give you a quick rundown. So basically, he's on trial for murder. He is accused of murdering his ex-girlfriend's current boyfriend. He was allegedly using his daughter to spy on his ex-girlfriend, and essentially, he ends up, like I said, killing the new boyfriend. The thing that you should watch, most definitely, is the daughter's testimony. And she's 14 years old, so it's not funny by any means that she's up there. It's absolutely tragic that she had to deal with the alarming things she did at the ages that she did. But listening to her absolutely roast her dad with zero effort is so fucking satisfying and funny. The prosecutor will be like, who was driving you on that day in the van? And she's like, the defendant. And it's like about her dad. It's like she just calls him the defendant. She's so deadpan. Like, I am living for how she's just crucifying him. So if you like true crime, like I said, look into the Zachariah Anderson story.
Following day, I get a phone call, and they said, Sandy, we found your granddaughter, but we're not sure which one. And I said, Bella's a little taller. She's pretty slimmer. She don't get a little belly. And if you pull her hair up a little bit, because I do their hair, and it would be so long, and then I realized all the oil, they would never know. So they said, who's the one that wears a pull-up? And I said, that would be Cece. They said, well, then we have Cece. And I said, well, keep going. I said, find my Bella. And 2 hours later, they did.
It was 2 hours later that they said they had found
Yeah, she was
Bella.
at the bottom of the drum. And their skin was falling off as they were trying to get them out. Everybody needed so much therapy after that. Our hearts just go out to all of them.
This is one of the most disgusting and evil cases I've heard of recently. On the 7th of December 2017, teacher Thelma Boinville was desperately trying to make some extra money. She was doing a cleaning job to earn extra money for her family, and the job suited her as her 8-year-old could come along and play while she worked. This was really handy as it meant she didn't have to fork out for childcare. She set out cleaning some holiday homes on the day in question, and her daughter waited in the car. The spot was a lovely scenic place called Kelky Beach. However, instead of walking in on a normal holiday rental to clean, she walked into a nightmare. Stephen Brown and his girlfriend Hayley Dangerand were in the middle of robbing the place. They were scouring through drawers and wardrobes, hunting for valuables to steal. With Thelma walking in, their plan had been foiled. They decided they needed to dispose of their only witness. The evil pair tied up the mother, whose daughter waited unsuspectingly in the car outside. They used a machete, a knife, and a hammer to murder the innocent woman. But the horror was far from over. They exited the holiday home and came across Thelma's young daughter waiting in the car. They callously told the young girl, "We killed your mum," and then bound her up and gagged her. Sickeningly, they then took the 8-year-old into the home where they'd killed her mum and left her there tied up. The 2 Australian tourists who were renting the holiday home then came back and found the crime scene. The 2 killers were tracked down hours later in Thelma's car, which they'd stolen and driven off in. Hayley was actually wearing her victim's earrings at the time. They actually begged for the officers to just shoot them and end their lives, but they wouldn't get away that easily. Thelma's husband, Kevin, wasn't actually allowed to see his wife's body due to the extent of her injuries. The autopsy revealed that she'd fought for her life, with many defensive wounds indicating a struggle. Since the murder, Stephen and Hayley have both tried to blame each other. Stephen was found guilty of second-degree murder and apparently showed no emotion as the verdict was read out. Hayley is currently awaiting trial.
Did you know that a man recently faked a live stream to create an alibi so he could murder a pregnant woman? On December 18th, 2022, Natalie McNally, a 32-year-old who was 15 weeks pregnant, was brutally murdered in what lawyers are calling a sophisticated, calculating, and cool-headed plot. On December 19th, 2022, Stephen McCullough notified authorities after finding a gory scene at Natalie's home in a delightful residential neighborhood in Northern Ireland. Stabbed 18 times, she and her son in utero, whom her family are now calling Baby Dean, were dead. McCullough was arrested that same day but quickly ruled out as a suspect. The 32-year-old YouTuber had an alibi for the night of her murder, a 6-hour-long live stream playing Grand Theft Auto Vice City for his channel of about 37,000 subscribers. He had texted Natalie telling her about the live stream that afternoon and promoted it publicly on his social media, calling it the Violent Night Christmas live gaming stream. Despite having an alibi, detectives were unconvinced. Detective Chief Inspector Neil McGuinness thought there was something fishy about Stephen's live stream, saying he spoke throughout, continually, but did not speak to the people who were responding live, citing technical issues as an excuse for his limited interactions. Then, detectives became aware that you could pre-record and stream as if live. Game changer. Because next, a team of cyber experts examined the footage and Stephen's devices and declared that the footage had been pre-recorded. Bingo. McCullough was re-arrested on January 31st, 2023, at which point he conceded in a written statement to police that he pre-recorded the live stream on December 13th and 14th and streamed it the night of the 18th. However, he maintains his innocence and says the night of the murder he was drinking alone in his home and fell asleep. But a combination of CCTV evidence and witness testimony of Stephen's whereabouts that night would point to the contrary. CCTV footage shows a man officials believe is Stephen boarding a bus heading towards Natalie's home. In the video, the man is seen wearing a distinctive yellow glove underneath a black glove while passing change to the bus driver. Detectives say the yellow glove is consistent with traces of a marigold-colored cleaning glove found in Natalie's blood spatter at the crime scene. Moreover, a taxi driver confirmed that Stephen arrived at his home by taxi at about 11:13 p.m. that night. This timing would corroborate another important piece of evidence. Detectives found no activity on Stephen's phone between 6 p.m. and 11:16 p.m. the night of the murder, 3 minutes between when the taxi reportedly dropped him off and use on his phone began. If it's a coincidence, it's a wild one. But lawyers say some of the most chilling evidence that Stephen is capable of deception beyond imagination is his continued interference with Natalie's family in the wake of her death. He only met them briefly twice before, but when he came to their home, they welcomed him in. And he was caught leaving his phone there on purpose, during which time he recorded 40 minutes of audio. Detectives believe the invasion of privacy was an attempt to inquire into the progress of the police investigation and to see whether there's any suspicions around him. The effort certainly backfired. Lawyers urged the judge to refuse Stephen's bail for fear of further tampering with witnesses, a request the judge granted. The judge said of the case that at present mostly hangs on the fact that the live stream was not actually a live stream. And I quote, "I don't know that I've ever come across a case that is so complex. That if the police are right, this was a cold-blooded attack which was meticulously planned with absolutely tragic consequences. And in all the circumstances, I also am concerned about the issues which the prosecution are concerned with. The risk of further offending if he can carry out an attack like this, if the police case is right, then who knows what else he is capable of." The case is still ongoing, and as the trial continues to unfold, Natalie's family have asked to grieve privately. They say of this difficult period, the bottom has fallen out of our world. I don't see any future anymore. But they also hope to use our platform to call for an immediate end to violence against women and girls.